Hello everyone. I appreciate it's been a fair while once again. I'm not going to make some grand re-entrance into the YouTube space at all. I think it's one of those things that, and it's odd, a couple of years ago, I put my face out there for you all to see. There was a huge amount of trepidation for me in doing that, putting a face to the name as it were. And I was so overwhelmed with the response to it. And obviously it opened doors for me in ways that I couldn't have imagined. I've been on the Overlap a few times. I've done the Ripple Effect with James Alcott. I've been on the BBC. I've been in different places. And none of that would have been possible without the YouTube channel and being able to own my face, as it were. But I have slacked off to a certain extent when it comes to YouTube content over the last few months. It's not a decision that I made consciously. It's just something that happened. You do the 2 podcasts a day, Monday to Friday. You do the 2 podcasts with Flav. You've got a little boy, you've got a wife, you've got a mortgage, you've got all this stuff. And, time just drifts. But I feel like I want to come back to YouTube. And this isn't, as I say, some grand reopening of me going, I'm going to be here every single day. But I want to come back in a more informal sense. I'm extremely appreciative of the fact that the videos that I previously have done, whether it be the deep dives into the likes of Portsmouth or to Middlesbrough or Sunderland or Plymouth, they've been extremely well received by the fan bases of those clubs. But they do take quite a lot of time to put together. They do feel quite, I suppose, stilted in their delivery because there's so many facts and figures and things that I don't want to get wrong. Whereas, if I'm just myself on here and I can be a bit more freewheeling, then I think it probably will serve both myself and you as the viewer better. And with that in mind, I thought today I would discuss Sky Sports, the general state of TV coverage of football, not necessarily the live game, but specifically thinking about deadline day, because obviously it was only a couple of days back that deadline day for the January window came and went. And I exclaimed on social media that, I wasn't watching Sky Sports News transfer deadline day coverage. I don't think many people, if any, were. And if you compare that to even 10 years ago, when it was appointment viewing, people used to take the day off work to watch Sky Sports News, to see the breaking stories, to hear the insight, to hear it first. Of course, you've had the whole situation with supporters crowding around reporters, and the reason why that hasn't continued is something that is well known. But I do think that social media as a whole has changed the way that Sky Sports News have been forced to operate. They do feel, I think, a little bit backed into the corner. And with that in mind, they have diversified their coverage to a certain extent. They've replaced Soccer AM, for example, with Saturday Social, which does involve a lot of people from this YouTube space and social media generally in that discussion. And obviously that has been met with a fair bit of pushback. And this isn't some grand plan from me to sort of reimagine the way that Sky Sports News or a channel could operate, in as many words. But I do think that there is scope for a bit of a shift. And maybe, in recording this video and having this thought process, I am merely serving my own ends. I'm not sure. This isn't a case of me putting myself forward as someone who should be on TV every time. That isn't what I'm saying. But if you actually look at the way that football media is consumed now, of course, the likes of David Ornstein and Fabrizio Romano have completely changed the game when it comes to transfer gossip. But I do think there is an appetite out there for a more informative and a more in-depth football coverage channel. Whether that be via Sky Sports or TNT or a completely new iteration with a new company, I'm not sure. I think it would probably be far easier to implement what my sort of idea is if you had that amount of money behind it that Sky Sports or TNT already have, given the fact they've got skin in the game. But my own perspective as a Crystal Palace fan is that more and more, really, over the last 2 to 3 years, football coverage in this country has become top 6 centric. It is a constant source of consternation on social media, frustration. There was a tweet I sent a week or so ago, maybe a little bit longer, where one of the Sky Sports News reporters that was covering the Southampton versus Newcastle game at St Mary's, they threw back to the studio. They were talking about Alexander Isak scoring a second goal, and immediately they linked it to a potential move to Arsenal. Now, you can argue that that's just a journalist doing his job, but for me, it was symptomatic of a wider problem, which is that pretty much everyone outside of Arsenal, Manchester United, Manchester City, Liverpool, Chelsea, those top clubs, outside of those, everything is seen really as window dressing, as sort of the starter before the main course. And I just don't think that is something which has legs in the long term. I understand it from Sky Sports' point of view. Manchester United draws eyeballs, it draws intrigue, it draws conversations. And if you look at The Overlap, for example, a programme I'm very, very pleased and humbled to have been invited on, you always have a situation where the likes of Arsenal, Manchester United, Liverpool, etc., they do get more time than the other clubs. But I don't necessarily think that is because there is a lack of interest from football watchers everywhere to find out extra stories, to find out what is going on in different parts of the game, different corners, different alleyways. And, in researching this, and I say researching, it was more just making sure that my dates lined up, I was reminded of a clip that involved James Horncastle, an Italian football expert, who was covering the game for TNT or with TNT when Atalanta went to Anfield in the quarter-finals of the Europa League last season. They won the game 3-0 on Merseyside. It was something of a shock, but I don't think it was that much of a shock to those who have watched Gasparini's team over the last few years, and James Horncastle undeniably is one of those people. If you look at the reaction to James Horncastle, to the amount of information he crammed into a 2 or 3 minute clip, to his general knowledge of that team, of Serie A, of the overall landscape of that tie, and why no one should really have been surprised to see them do to Liverpool what they did, it got such a visceral and positive reaction. And I think I at the time exclaimed and said, why isn't there more of this on mainstream television? Why aren't we as the viewers treated with a little bit more, not respect, but a little bit more belief in the fact that we are interested in stories away from the top 3 or 4 clubs, that we do want to hear about, lesser trodden stories, about things that are going on in the Championship, in League One, in League Two, in the French top tier, in the Portuguese top tier. And my perspective here is that you could potentially reimagine Sky Sports News or have a completely breakaway channel that does have rolling coverage, yes, that does show the goals, that does give you all of the sort of bite-sized chunks that you've become used to, but does so alongside voices that carry weight. I, again, was very lucky to be invited to the Football Supporters Association Awards for the last couple of years. I won a couple of years ago in my category. This year, I lost to Not the Top 20 podcast. Now, you may not be aware of who Not the Top 20 podcast are. I'm assuming most of the people watching this will be. They are run by 2 guys, George and Ali. They are both extremely knowledgeable when it comes to not just the Championship, but League One and League Two as well. And I listen to it religiously. I am not a follower of a club in the EFL, as you will no doubt know, given the fact that I am well documented to be a Crystal Palace fan. But I find it genuinely interesting. It's informative. It is not done with bias. It's not done with the attempt to sort of shout people down or have opinions that are going to get the most reactions. It's there to inform people, to intrigue them, to make them more aware of something than they would otherwise have been. And my perspective is very much that if you did have weekly shows focusing on the Championship, on League One, on League Two, on Ligue 1 in France, on the Portuguese top tier, on La Liga, and you had experts within their fields that were asked about this. Almost, if you remember back to the era of Sunday Supplement. Now, I'm not talking about going back to that. You've got 4 or 5 journalists sitting around a table eating croissants and, ramming home their opinions. I'm talking about that sort of system. You think about podcasts and their popularity, they have absolutely exploded in recent times. And I appreciate that podcasts are a slightly different medium because you are talking about an audio format rather than a visual one. But people enjoy hearing these things. Individuals like Raphael Honigstein, like Julian Laurent, like James Horncastle, who are experts in their specific fields, they have a huge following because of it. And I think there is really a market there, whether it comes to, Leeds United, Sheffield Wednesday, even down into, League One and League Two, the Millwalls, the Rotherhams. If you have a weekly show that lasts an hour, yes, or maybe even an hour and 15 minutes, where you can get individuals that work in not necessarily fan media-led publications, but people that are on the ground, that understand these clubs intrinsically, I think you will succeed in building a greater understanding of the pyramid that we all hold so dearly. Because I don't necessarily think that English football watchers, or indeed British football watchers, if you're going to include the Scottish game in this, I don't think they necessarily want to just talk about the top 3 or 4 clubs every single week. I think that is the model that has been pursued by the channels that, dictate the landscape, Sky, TNT. Now, the argument that will no doubt come back to me is that those are the clubs that do the most clicks, the most eyeballs, etc., etc., and I understand it. But if you build the foundations of the game in terms of an interest level to a higher bar, then you will, as a collective, I feel, have a situation where people are more informed about Southampton, about Ipswich, about Leeds, about any of the clubs that you can talk about in the English football pyramid. You could have a weekly magazine show that covers, I don't know, the German game, but rather than just showing you the goals and putting over a little bit of 90s or 80s German pop and have a sort of phoned in commentary of it, you could have actual experts to understand these clubs, to understand the executives, the managers, the coaches, the players, the fans even, and get a more boots on the ground feel for exactly how these clubs are operating. I don't know about you, but Copper 90 are to me one of the best YouTube channels around when it comes to football. Eli Mangum is someone who has revolutionised the game as far as I'm concerned because of his Derby Days features. If you haven't seen them, he goes to all sorts of games across the globe. He's been to Boca versus River Plate. It was one of the most incredible documentaries you'll ever see. Forget about mainstream television. I'm talking about the sort of handheld camera style of documentary making. And most recently, they released one that concerned the Argentinian World Cup win. Now, that was a huge project, of course. It took a great deal of time, effort and money from Eli and everyone else at Copper 90 to put together. But if you look at the reaction to it, if you look at how involved the people that watched it and digested it were with that story, you will see that there is a huge market there for people to understand football on a more intrinsic level, rather than just looking, and there is a place for the Jamie Carragers and the Gary Nevilles and the Roy Keanes to analyse things in granular detail on Monday Night Football. I'm not talking about that. I am talking about a more well-rounded and overall picture of the English game, of the European game. And I feel as though, and maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree here and it's a completely pie-in-the-sky idea that will not have legs, but I honestly feel that if there was a channel that had a weekly show on the French top tier, on the German top tier, on the Spanish top tier, on the Portuguese top tier, if they had magazine shows and talk shows about the Championship, about League One, about League Two, about non-league, alongside the Premier League, but you had experts in all of those clubs, almost on sort of a rolling basis, then you would be onto something in terms of getting people to truly understand the very fabric of the game at every level, rather than just having this situation where you're almost force-fed conversations about Manchester United, about Arsenal, about Liverpool. I love the overlap. I love Stick to Football. I watch them both religiously, as I've said in the earlier part of this video. But there is an ongoing narrative that if you look at the guests that go on Stick to Football, they tend to be people that Gary Neville is in the direct remit of. Understandably, given the fact that it is his podcast, so he has a contact book which he will try and exhaust. But there are only so many times you can hear about Sir Alex Ferguson and the glory days of the treble. And eventually you do have a desire to hear about other things. And I would use the viral nature of that clip of James Horncastle talking about Atalanta, about Gasperini, about the entire footballing spirit of Bergamo and exactly what has been built there as a prime example that there is an appetite for it, that it can be tapped into, and that football outside of the confines of your 4 and 5 biggest clubs in this country does have a place that can be digested in terms of a TV channel in 2025. The deadline day coverage might have seen its best days. I appreciate that, but I don't think TV as a medium is dead. I appreciate that people are far more transient in the way they watch things now. They don't expect to sort of sit down for 2 or 3 hours at a time and wait for stuff to come on. But if you did have an interactive channel that was maybe online where you could catch up with the hour and a half show, with the hour and 15-minute show that was covering League One, then you would build a loyal following and you would have genuine integrity, I think, as a broadcaster, because you were shining a light on things that prior to the invention of this fictional channel there was just no real space for. I appreciate as well that TV executives might watch this and think, come on, you're living in cloud cuckoo land. But I just look at it and think, myself, I have managed to build a living talking about Crystal Palace and football generally, yes, But there is no reason, really, that someone like myself should be able to get into this industry unless the people who watch this and the people who follow me on social media feel connected to me in some way. And that, of course, is something I'm incredibly humbled by. But I think it shows directly that there is an audience out there. If I can amass 150,000 plus followers on social media talking about Crystal Palace as an individual that just goes and doesn't have any skin in the game in terms of a professional record by definition, then quite clearly other informed people, whether they're talking about Southampton, Sheffield United, Bayer Leverkusen, people will want to hear those stories and they will build relationships with those people. And I would have thought it would be, a way to sort of differentiate football media coverage for the mainstream that can maintain a sense of integrity whilst also building, a general belief that there is more to the English game than just Manchester United, Arsenal, Liverpool, etc. That's my manifesto, as it were. That's my blueprint. As I say, it's more off the cuff, this video, than previous ones I've done. Hopefully I haven't sounded as though I've waffled too much. I do intend to be on here far more frequently now. I know I've said that in the past, but I do genuinely mean it this time. So if you are someone who's enjoyed this video and you haven't yet subscribed, please do consider doing that. If you can like this video, maybe leave a comment, let me know whether I'm talking complete waffle or whether you agree with me. I would very much appreciate that as well. And I will look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers.